As you may have heard, today one of BC's largest unions joined forces with private liquor stores to push for the sale of recreational marijuana in liquor stores. The BC Government and Service Employees Union partnered with the BC Private Liquor Stores Association to make the pitch. This, of course, comes in the wake of the federal Liberals making a campaign promise to legalize marijuana. To take a closer look at what it would take to sell marijuana at liquor stores, I'm joined by Walsh. He's an associate professor of psychology at UBC, and he's on the line with us now. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Thanks for having me.
What do you think of this announcement?
Well, it's not surprising. I think on the surface, I could see why it would make sense to folks to think that we have this existing infrastructure. Why don't we just use it instead of reinventing the wheel? And I think that there's some sense to that, but I also think that cannabis is very distinct from alcohol, and there's a number of factors that I think would suggest that there's more elegant solutions than just having cannabis for sale underneath a glass countertop at the liquor store.
Talk to me a little bit about that. What makes it different, and how do we need a more elegant, as you say, solution then?
Well, there are so many differences between alcohol and cannabis that I think just to extrapolate from one to the other is going to miss the boat in some ways. And we have a well-developed culture, particularly in British Columbia, around delivering cannabis to people who want it. The dispensaries have been operating in a gray area, but at varying levels of professionalism, but in many cases have done a good job and have a lot of expertise in talking to people about cannabis and how it might work for them. And I would hate for us to lose that expertise for a one-size-fits-all model. So I think there's going to be a lot of options, or should be a lot of options, of how people can access cannabis. It should be regulated, certainly, but we want the regulation to match the actual risks and not just copy what we've done with alcohol.
The dispensaries, though, I would think, or should be, or at least they're mandated to deal mostly with medicinal marijuana. Are they not? We're talking about recreational here.
Well, I think there's going to be differences, and I think that's another reason why we won't see complete coverage through a liquor store model, because there are going to be people who are using medicinally, and there'll probably be a growing number of people who conceptualize their use in a medicinal way, and those people may not want to go to a liquor store to get their cannabis. So I think that building on the dispensaries, which is what some of the states in the U.S. have done, could be really helpful in terms of getting people who have the expertise in cannabis involved in it, and also making sure that there's room in this market for all different sizes of players. I imagine that to some extent it's still going to go through the liquor control and licensing branch of the Ministry of Justice. So I would expect that on the higher level it'll be regulated like alcohol, but when it comes to vending, I think there's some benefits to having distinct outlets.
And it sounds as though, because if I take what you're saying here, it's in part because there is this medical side to marijuana that we don't see with alcohol.
Yeah, there's a medical side. There's certainly less risks around acute intoxication. So tobacco is also a dangerous substance that we limit and regulate how it's sold, but we don't only sell it at liquor stores. So I don't think we have to just borrow from the alcohol model. Also, cannabis is perishable, so people are going to want to be able to handle it and have a look at it and perhaps smell it, and that's not the case with alcohol. It's a newer product to people, so there's going to be higher needs for education that I worry won't be met adequately if it's just on sale beside beer and wine. And it might send a message about mixing the two together that is not helpful. So I think there's got to be space for distinct outlets that aren't also selling alcohol.
And am I wrong in saying that the big union we're talking about and the private liquor stores might be jumping the gun here just a touch? We have no idea what Justin Trudeau actually plans to unroll here yet, do we?
Well, there's a lot of people that are going to want a piece of this new industry. So I'm not surprised that they're making a play. They're making a play for it, and on the surface there are a number of similarities and potential savings that I can see. So I don't know if they're jumping the gun, but I think there's going to be some more thinking to be done. And again, this is the first, or one of the first. Uruguay also has a federal legalization, but we're really leading the world when it comes to this. It's an exciting time. We want to make sure we do it right, and not just do the quick and easy way of throwing it in liquor stores. I think we can be a little bit more careful and more thoughtful about how we make this work.
You mentioned the states south of the border that have implemented marijuana into sort of their legal system. How does it work there, and are there any lessons we might take from that?
Well, in Washington State and in Oregon State, it is managed through the sort of the similar government offices of the liquor control. But they don't sell them in liquor. They don't sell in liquor stores in Washington. They're distinct outlets that specialize in cannabis. So just because they're being regulated at a state level by a similar body doesn't mean that that the vending has to follow. So I think that the distinct vendors seem to be working there, and I believe in Colorado as well. You don't get your alcohol and your cannabis in the same places.
Can you ever see it working, that we would have marijuana being sold at liquor stores under any circumstance? Can you say, yeah, this is something that I could get behind?
I think it could be one of the places where cannabis is sold, but I just don't think it should be the only place, and it may not be the best place, but I could see it possibly, depending on how restrictive they are in their regulations. Any restriction in regulating cannabis needs to be backed up by science about a real risk. So the risks for alcohol are pretty severe, and it's a more dangerous substance than cannabis. So we might be able to have less regulation around cannabis, or at least different regulation.
Okay.
With liquor.
Okay, Zach Walsh, thank you very much for this.
Oh, thank you. Anytime.
Zach Walsh is an associate professor of psychology at UBC. We'd love to hear from you on this. What do you think of recreational marijuana being sold at liquor stores? How do you think selling pot is different than selling liquor?